In the vast expanse of the Milky Way galaxy, where countless civilizations had risen and fallen like cosmic tides, the Zraxian Empire stood as the undisputed masters of conquest. For 17 millennia, they had subjugated over 300 species across 12 galactic sectors. Their military prowess was unmatched, their technological superiority absolute, and their governmental efficiency legendary. The Zraxians themselves were an imposing sight, 9-foot-tall bipedal beings, with iridescent exoskeletons that shifted colors according to rank and emotional state. Their forearms ended in precise, double-jointed appendages capable of manipulating technology with microscopic precision, while their elongated craniums housed triple-lobed brains that processed information at rates that would make quantum computers seem sluggish. Supreme Commander Vex'Ahlia stood on the observation deck of the Inevitable Dominance, flagship of the Zraxian Conquest fleet. Her exoskeleton pulsed with the deep purple of contemplative authority as she gazed at the small blue-green planet rotating slowly on the main view screen. Earth. Such an unimaginative name for a world. The inhabitants called themselves humans, equally unimaginative. But their planet was resource-rich, strategically positioned and, according to preliminary scans, populated by a species that had only achieved rudimentary space travel, perfect for assimilation into the Empire. Preliminary subjugation. Analysis complete, Supreme Commander, announced Sub-Commander Krex, his exoskeleton a dutiful shade of copper. Humans appear physically unimpressive, soft-bodied, limited sensory capabilities, slow neural processing. However, they demonstrate surprising adaptability and unpredictable behavior patterns that may complicate standard conquest protocols. Vex'Ahlia's upper left hand made a dismissive gesture. Every species believes itself special, Sub-Commander, yet all eventually kneel. Implement Standard Conquest Protocol 5 Alpha. Begin with a single capture for detailed study, then proceed with targeted demonstrations of power. The usual progression. As you command, Krex responded with perfect military precision. Acquisition teams are prepped for deployment. We shall select a specimen that represents typical human capabilities, neither their weakest nor their strongest, most efficient for baseline assessment. The Supreme Commander turned from the view screen, her exoskeleton shifting to the decisive crimson of imminent action. The Eternal Emperor awaits news of another successful expansion. Do not disappoint. Down on Earth, Dave Miller was having what he considered a perfectly normal Tuesday evening. At 32, with a middling job as an IT support specialist and an apartment that could generously be described as lived in, Dave had settled into the comfortable rut that defined his existence. He sat on his couch, surrounded by the detritus of bachelor life, empty pizza boxes, scattered gaming controllers, and enough half-empty soda cans to build a small aluminum fortress. His cat, Photon, judged him silently from atop the refrigerator. "Don't look at me like that," Dave muttered to the cat as he scrolled through streaming options. "We can't all have the aspirational life of sleeping 18 hours a day and occasionally chasing dust particles." The cat blinked slowly in what Dave chose to interpret as a sarcastic response, just as Dave had settled on watching yet another documentary about the mysteries of the universe, ironically unaware of how non-mysterious it actually was, his living room filled with a soft blue light. At first, he assumed it was some weird effect from his bargain television, but when the light intensified and his entire body began to tingle, he realized something far more unusual was happening. "Huh?" was all Dave managed to say before he, his half-eaten slice of pepperoni pizza and the remote control clutched in his hand, vanished from his apartment, leaving behind only a confused cat and the suddenly silent television. The sensation of being teleported was not unlike what Dave imagined being turned into a human smoothie might feel like, followed by being poured back into human shape through a cosmic strainer. When the disorientation faded, he found himself standing in what was unmistakably not his apartment. The room, if it could be called that, was a perfect hexagon with walls of a material that seemed to shift between solid metal and translucent crystal. The air smelled faintly of ozone and cinnamon, an oddly pleasant combination. Dave looked down to discover he still held both his pizza slice and remote control, with a shrug that suggested this was merely an unusual turn of events rather than the reality-shattering moment it actually was. He took another bite of pizza. Subject appears to be consuming some form of sustenance despite translocation stress. Interesting, came a voice from everywhere and nowhere. Dave turned slowly, pizza still in hand, to find himself face to chest with an enormous insect-like creature whose exoskeleton was currently a clinical shade of teal. He had to crane his neck to look up at the being's face. 3 glowing eyes, arranged in a triangle above what might have been a mouth or possibly a speaker. Hi, Dave said, mouth still full of pizza. Nice place you've got here. Very hexagonal. The alien's exoskeleton flickered briefly to a surprised yellow before returning to teal. Subject demonstrates immediate linguistic response without evident fear response, atypical according to Conquest databanks. Dave swallowed his pizza and considered the remote in his other hand. He pointed it at the alien and pressed the power button, then the volume up button. When nothing happened, he shrugged and pocketed it. Worth a shot, he said. So I'm guessing this is an alien abduction situation? Should I be preparing for probes or something? Because I've got to tell you, I haven't even had dinner yet, and I generally prefer at least a drink first. The alien's exoskeleton shifted to a confused mauve. Subject employs humor as defense mechanism. Noted. It touched something on a panel at its side. I am Research Overseer Zk'Taar of the Zraxian Empire. You have been selected as a representative specimen of your species for preliminary study before the commencement of planetary subjugation. Dave nodded thoughtfully. Planetary subjugation. Got it. So like an invasion thing? You guys planning to take over Earth? Correct. The Zraxian Empire requires your world's resources and strategic position. Your species will be assimilated into our workforce hierarchy. Resistance is futile and illogical. Zk'Taar stated this as one might mention that water is wet, or that gravity tends to pull things downward. Dave took another bite of pizza, chewed thoughtfully, and then asked, "And what if we don't want to be assimilated?" The alien's 3 eyes blinked in perfect sequence. Want? Your preferences are irrelevant. All species initially resist. All species eventually serve. This is the way of the universe. Huh, Dave said again. Well, that doesn't sound great for us. What's the timeline on this whole planetary subjugation thing? I've got a dentist appointment next Thursday that I've already rescheduled twice. Zk'Taar's exoskeleton pulsed with confusion. You express concern about a minor medical procedure. In the face of your civilization's impending domination? Dave shrugged. I really hate canceling appointments. The receptionist gives me this look, you know. Besides, it's not like I personally can stop an alien invasion. I work in IT. The most advanced technology I regularly handle is showing people how to reconnect to the office Wi-Fi. The alien made a sound that might have been the Zraxian equivalent of clearing its throat. Your psychological assessment begins now. Please respond to the following stimuli. What followed was what Dave could only describe as the strangest job interview of his life. Zk'Taar showed him a series of holograms depicting various scenarios, natural disasters, confrontations with authority figures, moral dilemmas involving trains and multiple potential victims, and recorded his responses. Dave approached each scenario with the same casual indifference he brought to most aspects of his life, occasionally making jokes or pointing out logical flaws in the setups. So you're saying I can only pull one lever? Couldn't I just, yell really loudly to warn the people on both tracks? Or better yet, why am I hanging out by train tracks with access to switch levers anyway? Seems like a liability issue. By the time the assessment concluded, Zk'Taar's exoskeleton had cycled through so many colors that Dave wondered if he was witnessing some form of alien disco fever. The research overseer finally stepped back, all 4 hands manipulating different control panels simultaneously. Assessment complete. Results: inconclusive. Subject displays neither the expected fear response nor the aggression patterns typical of species facing conquest. Instead, Subject exhibits. The alien paused, seemingly searching for the right term. Inappropriate casualness. I get that a lot. Dave nodded. My high school teachers called it an attitude problem. My ex-girlfriend called it emotional unavailability. I call it being realistic about my limited impact on events beyond my control. Zk'Taar's exoskeleton settled into a frustrated ochre. You are facing extinction or enslavement. Does this not concern you? Dave finished the last bite of his now cold pizza and wiped his hands on his jeans. Look, I'm just one guy. If you're advanced enough to teleport me from my living room, you're probably advanced enough to do whatever you want to Earth. Me freaking out won't change that. So instead, I'm curious. What's it like being part of this empire of yours? Do you get good benefits? Vacation time? Stock options? The alien stared at him for a long moment before touching another control. Supreme Commander, the human specimen is unusual. Request permission for extended study before proceeding with Conquest protocol. The response was immediate, a voice that somehow managed to sound both melodious and utterly authoritative. Explain the anomaly, Research Overseer. The human displays non-standard response patterns. Instead of fear or defiance, it exhibits curiosity and acceptance. This may indicate either advanced psychological resilience or fundamental misunderstanding of its situation. There was a pause before the Supreme Commander responded. Interesting. Bring the specimen to the central analysis chamber. I will observe personally. Dave found himself escorted through corridors that seemed to stretch and contract as he walked, defying normal spatial physics. The ship, he assumed it was a ship, hummed with energy that he could feel in his teeth and the base of his spine. Other aliens, all with similar insectoid features but varying in size and exoskeleton color, moved with purpose through the passageways. Some stopped to stare at the human in their midst, their exoskeletons briefly flashing curious yellows and greens. So, Dave said conversationally to his escort, "Do you guys have anything like coffee here? I'm usually not fully functional without my morning cup." Zk'Taar's exoskeleton pulsed with what might have been exasperation. Humans require neurostimulants to achieve baseline cognitive function? This was not in our preliminary data. Not all humans, Dave clarified. Just those of us who've built our personalities around caffeine dependency and mild self-deprecation. They arrived at a vast chamber dominated by a raised platform surrounded by tiered seating, like a cross between an operating theater and a parliament. Dozens of Zraxians occupied the seats, their exoskeletons creating a rainbow effect as they shifted and pulsed with different emotions. At the center of the platform stood the tallest Zraxian Dave had seen yet, her exoskeleton a deep, authoritative purple. Supreme Commander Vex'Ahlia, Zk'Taar announced with a formal gesture that involved all four arms moving in complex patterns. I present the human specimen. Designation. He paused, realizing he had never asked for Dave's name. Dave, supplied the human helpfully. Dave Miller, tech support and occasional pizza enthusiast. Nice spaceship, by the way. Very spacious. The Supreme Commander's exoskeleton rippled with subtle patterns as she studied Dave. You understand your situation, human? Dave nodded. Your research guy here explained it. You're planning to conquer Earth, and I'm the test subject to figure out how best to subjugate humanity. Standard alien invasion stuff, I guess. And this does not distress you? The commander's tone suggested she found this difficult to process. Oh, I wouldn't say that, Dave replied. I'm distressed in the abstract sense, but panicking won't help, and honestly, I'm kind of curious about the whole thing. I mean, space travel, aliens, a galactic empire. It's like every sci-fi movie I've ever watched, except I'm the expendable human character who probably dies in the first act to establish the stakes. Vex'Ahlia turned to address the assembled Zraxians. As you can observe, this human demonstrates the species' noted adaptability but in an unexpected form. Rather than physical adaptation, it shows psychological flexibility that our Conquest databanks did not predict. Dave raised his hand like a student in class. Quick question. When you say subjugation, what exactly does that entail? Are we talking about death camps or more like filling out tax forms in triplicate for alien overlords? Because there's a pretty big difference in how I should feel about those scenarios. The chamber filled with the chittering sounds of surprised Zraxians, their exoskeletons flickering with colors that suggested they couldn't believe the humans' audacity. The Supreme Commander, however, seemed intrigued. The Zraxian Empire is not barbaric, she stated firmly. We do not needlessly exterminate productive populations. Humans would be assessed for optimal placement within our labor hierarchy. Some would mine resources, others would serve in factories. The more intelligent specimens might earn positions in research or administrative divisions. So, jobs, Dave said flatly. You're offering humanity jobs. Not offering, Vex'Ahlia corrected. Assigning. Compliance is mandatory. Dave nodded thoughtfully. And what about benefits? Healthcare, retirement plans, work-life balance? The Supreme Commander's exoskeleton flickered with confusion. Explain these concepts. Well, Dave began, warming to the subject. Healthcare means medical treatment when we get sick. Retirement is when we get too old to work efficiently and want to spend our remaining time relaxing. And work-life balance is the idea that we shouldn't spend all our waking hours laboring, but should have time for, enjoying existence. The assembled Zraxians began exchanging glances, their exoskeletons shifting through patterns that suggested intense communication was happening. The Supreme Commander's own color deepened to a contemplative indigo. The Zraxian Empire provides for the basic needs of all subjects, she finally stated. Illness is treated to maintain workforce productivity. When specimens become too deteriorated for efficient labor, they are processed for resource reclamation. Processed? Dave's eyebrows shot up. That sounds suspiciously like Soylent Green territory. I do not understand this reference. Vex'Ahlia said. It means turning people into food when they're no longer useful, Dave explained. Generally considered a social faux pas on Earth. The chamber erupted with the equivalent of alien gasps. The Supreme Commander's exoskeleton flashed with indignant crimson. The Zraxian Empire does not consume sentient beings. We merely recycle their physical components for industrial applications. Their consciousness patterns are extracted and stored in the eternal memory banks. Oh, so you download their brains and recycle their bodies. Dave nodded. That's slightly better, I guess. Though I have questions about quality of life as a disembodied consciousness. Zk'Taar leaned toward the Supreme Commander. This specimen continues to demonstrate unusual thought patterns. It negotiates where others would plead and inquires where others would fear. Vex'Ahlia nodded. Human Dave Miller, your responses suggest you might adapt well to Imperial service. Perhaps you would function optimally as a test case for human integration. You will be assigned preliminary duties aboard this vessel to assess your species' capabilities under direct Zraxian supervision. Dave considered this proposition. On one hand, alien abduction and forced labor. On the other hand, space travel and a front-row seat to interstellar politics. Plus, he didn't have anything better to do until Thursday's dentist appointment. Do I get bathroom breaks, he asked? And meals? Human bodies have these annoying maintenance requirements. The Supreme Commander made a gesture that might have been the alien equivalent of rolling her eyes. Your biological necessities will be accommodated. Research Overseer Zk'Taar will supervise your integration and document your performance for the Conquest assessment. And so began Dave Miller's career as the first human employee of the Zraxian Empire. His initial assignment was in what the aliens called data sequence verification, essentially checking rows of symbols on screens and confirming that they followed proper patterns. It was mind-numbingly boring, but not particularly difficult. This is basically the alien equivalent of data entry, Dave commented to Zk'Taar on his third day. I'm surprised your advanced civilization hasn't automated this. Automation lacks the intuitive pattern recognition of biological minds, the research overseer explained. And this task is considered. The alien's exoskeleton shifted to an embarrassed mauve beneath Zraxian cognitive capabilities. So it's grunt work that you don't want to do yourselves. Dave translated. Some aspects of advanced civilizations are surprisingly familiar. Over the following weeks, Dave was assigned to increasingly complex tasks as the Zraxians assessed his capabilities. He cleaned filtration systems, sorted mysterious artifacts, and even helped repair minor malfunctions in the ship's electrical systems, his IT background proving unexpectedly transferable to alien technology once he grasped the basic principles. Throughout it all, he maintained his characteristic casual attitude, approaching each task with neither enthusiasm nor complaint, just steady, somewhat detached competence. He asked questions constantly, absorbing information about Zraxian culture, technology, and the Empire's structure, with the passive interest of someone watching a moderately engaging documentary. What the Zraxians failed to notice was that Dave was connecting dots they didn't realize were related. His years of troubleshooting technology had given him an intuitive understanding of systems, how they worked, where their vulnerabilities lay, and most importantly, how users interacted with them. And the Zraxian Empire, for all its advanced technology and military might, was ultimately just another system. After a month aboard the inevitable Dominance, Dave was summoned again to the central analysis chamber. The Supreme Commander's exoskeleton pulsed with thoughtful blues as she addressed the assembled Zraxian officials. "The human integration experiment has yielded unexpected data," she announced. "Human Dave has demonstrated adequate performance across multiple assignment categories. More significantly, he has shown neither resistance nor resentment toward his duties. This suggests that human psychological adaptation to Imperial service may be more straightforward than our Conquest models." Predicted. Dave, who stood in the center of the chamber wearing the simple gray jumpsuit he'd been provided, raised his hand again. "Permission to offer an observation?" The Supreme Commander's exoskeleton flickered with surprise, but she nodded. "Proceed." "I think you're misinterpreting my behavior," Dave said casually. "I'm not particularly cooperative because humans are naturally submissive. I'm cooperative because this whole situation isn't that different from my regular life on Earth." Confused chittering spread through the chamber. Vex'Ahlia's exoskeleton shifted to a questioning amber. "Explain." Dave shrugged. "Back on Earth, I already spent most of my waking hours doing tasks I didn't choose for organizations I had no control over, in exchange for basic survival necessities. You call it Imperial service. We call it having a job. The main difference is that your spaceship is cleaner than my office was, and the cafeteria food is more interesting if occasionally alive." The chamber fell silent as the Zraxians processed this information. Zk'Taar's exoskeleton pulsed with analytical patterns. "Supreme Commander, the human suggests that Earth's existing social structures may already approximate our labor hierarchy systems." "Is this accurate, Human Dave?" Vex'Ahlia asked. "Do humans already organize themselves into productivity castes with mandatory labor assignments?" "Well, we call them socio-economic classes and jobs, but basically, yeah," Dave nodded. "Most humans spend most of their lives doing work they wouldn't choose to do if they had complete freedom, to acquire resources they need to survive, under the direction of authority figures they didn't elect." The Supreme Commander's exoskeleton shifted to a troubled violet. "If humans already exist within a subjugation framework, what value does Zraxian conquest provide to the Empire? We expend considerable resources establishing control systems that, apparently, already exist." Dave tried not to smile. The seed he'd planted was taking root. "That's a good question. From what I've observed of your Empire's needs, you mainly want three things from conquered planets: resources, labor, and compliance, right?" Vex'Ahlia nodded slowly. "These are the fundamental requirements of Imperial expansion." "Well," Dave continued, "Earth already has highly efficient systems for extracting and processing resources. We have established labor forces with specialized skills. And most importantly, we have deeply ingrained cultural expectations about showing up to work even when we don't want to. You could probably get everything you want through corporate partnerships, rather than military conquest." The chamber erupted with Zraxian exclamations. exoskeletons flashing through rainbows of color as they debated this radical notion. The Supreme Commander raised two of her arms for silence. Human Dave suggests a conquest alternative that would require significantly fewer imperial resources while potentially yielding the same benefits, she summarized. This merits serious consideration. Over the next several days, Dave found himself in continuous meetings with various Zraxian officials, explaining Earth's corporate structures, employment practices, and consumer behaviors. He detailed how humans would willingly work in difficult conditions for the promise of compensation, how they developed brand loyalty to products and organizations, and how Earth's existing resource extraction industries could be quietly influenced rather than forcibly commandeered. The beauty of it, Dave explained to a rapt audience of Zraxian economists, is that humans will actually work harder when they think they're choosing to participate in a system than when they're overtly forced. We have this whole psychological infrastructure built around the idea of earning a living that makes us internalize productivity demands. Zk'Taar, whose role had evolved from Dave's supervisor to something more like a collaborator, displayed patterns of revelation on his exoskeleton. It is counterintuitive yet elegant. Less visible control yields greater productivity and requires less enforcement. The Zraxians were particularly fascinated by the concept of consumer culture, the idea that humans would not only work to produce goods, but would then use their compensation to acquire more goods, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of production and consumption. So they labor to earn currency, one Zraxian economist clarified, then exchange that currency for products, which creates demand for more products, necessitating more labor? Exactly, Dave nodded. We call it the economy, and questioning it too deeply is generally discouraged. As these discussions progressed, Dave noticed a subtle but significant shift in how the Zraxians referred to the planned Earth operation. What had begun as a conquest or subjugation was increasingly described as an integration or market expansion. Military personnel were being reassigned, and specialists in commerce, media, and cultural influence were being consulted. 3 months after his abduction, Dave found himself sitting across from Supreme Commander Vex'Ahlia in what he had come to recognize as her private strategic chamber. Her exoskeleton glowed with the deep blue of serious contemplation. Human. Dave, she began, the Imperial Strategic Council has authorized a fundamental revision to the Earth Acquisition Protocol. Based largely on your input, we will implement what we are calling the Invisible Hand Integration, a reference to one of your own economic philosophers. Dave nodded, trying not to show his amusement at the Zraxians quoting Adam Smith. That sounds less violent than the alternatives. Indeed, rather than overt military conquest, we will establish corporate entities on Earth, introduce selected technologies to create market dependencies, and gradually establish influence over your resource and labor systems. Her exoskeleton shifted to an efficient green. Initial projections suggest this approach will yield 78% of standard conquest benefits, while requiring only 23% of the resource expenditure. Efficient, Dave agreed. And how does this affect Earth's nominal independence? Earth will retain the appearance of autonomy, Vex'Ahlia explained. Your governments will continue to function as visible authority structures, while our influence operates through economic channels. Humans will believe they are making free choices while actually serving imperial interests. Dave leaned back in his chair, or the Zraxian approximation of a chair, which was more like a semi-sentient cushion that adjusted to his posture. So basically, we get to keep our illusion of freedom while you get our resources and labor without the hassle of obvious occupation or the expense of maintaining control through force. Precisely, the Supreme Commander's exoskeleton pulsed with satisfaction. A mutually optimal arrangement. And what happens to me? Dave asked. Do I go back to Earth as patient zero for alien influence, or do I stay here as your human consultant? Vex'Ahlia's exoskeleton shifted to a color Dave hadn't seen before, a warm, almost friendly shade of turquoise. That, human Dave, is a choice we are offering to you. Your insights have been valuable enough that the Empire would welcome your continued service as a cultural liaison. However, If you prefer to return to Earth, you would be well compensated for your cooperation and positioned within one of our emerging corporate structures. Dave considered his options. Return to Earth with a cushy job in an alien-owned corporation, or stay aboard an advanced spaceship traveling the galaxy. His apartment would have been rented to someone else by now. His cat had hopefully been adopted by the neighbor who always complained about Photon sitting on her car. His life on Earth had been fine, just fine. Nothing more. I think I'll stay, Dave decided. Earth will still be there if I change my mind, and I've barely scratched the surface of understanding your technology. Plus, the zero-gravity bathroom is an experience I'm not ready to give up. The Supreme. Commander's exoskeleton pulsed with what Dave had learned to recognize as amusement. A practical decision. You will be assigned quarters appropriate to your new status and granted access to educational resources regarding Imperial systems. Your continued insights will be valued. 6 months later, Dave stood beside Zk'Taar, now officially his colleague rather than his supervisor, on the observation deck, watching Earth grow larger on the view screen as the inevitable dominance moved into high orbit. Since his decision to stay with the Zraxians, Dave had grown accustomed to life aboard the massive vessel. He'd learned enough of their language to hold basic conversations without translation assistance, gained 10 pounds from the surprisingly delicious synthesized food, once he'd learned which options weren't still living, and even developed something, like friendships with several crew members. The first corporate integration units are ready for deployment, Zk'Taar informed him, exoskeleton glowing with professional satisfaction. Zrax Industries, Eternal Horizon Healthcare, and Dominion. Consumer Products will establish their Earth headquarters within the month. Dave nodded, watching the blue-green planet that had been his home. Any predictions on how long before Zraxian influence reaches significant levels? Based on models incorporating your insights, we project 40% market penetration within 5. Earth years 65% within 10, and functional economic control within 25, Zk'Taar replied. Without a single weapons deployment or visible occupation force, humans are surprisingly eager to embrace new technologies and products, especially when they promise convenience or status, Dave commented. The irony is that most people won't even notice the transition. They'll be too busy trying to afford the latest Zraxtech communication device or getting promoted within their Zraxian-owned company. Zk'Taar's exoskeleton pulsed with curious patterns. In our mandatory historical studies, we learn that conquered species typically resist subjugation, often for generations. Yet you suggest humans will not only accept but enthusiastically participate in their own integration into the Empire. Dave shrugged. The difference is perception. Nobody likes being conquered, but most people are fine with new job opportunities, exciting products, and the chance to participate in what looks like progress. The Zraxian Empire isn't going to rule Earth, it's going to own it, and ownership is something humans understand and respect. As they watched, the first shuttles began their descent toward Earth, carrying not soldiers but executives, engineers, and marketing specialists. The invasion had begun, but no one on Earth would recognize it as such. There would be no dramatic battles, no heroic resistance, no obvious moment of surrender. Just press releases, job fairs, product launches, and investment opportunities. You know what the funniest part is? Dave said after a moment of contemplation. Back on Earth, I used to watch sci-fi movies about alien invasions. Ships in the sky, death rays, humanity uniting to fight back against the otherworldly threat. But reality turned out to be much more mundane. The aliens aren't going to enslave us with weapons. They're going to make us better offers than we're currently getting. Zk'Taar's exoskeleton shifted to a philosophical blue. The Supreme Commander has cited your case as evidence that the Empire's traditional conquest methodology requires fundamental revision. Why deploy military assets when economic integration achieves superior results with fewer resources? You may have inadvertently transformed Zraxian expansion policy across the galaxy. Dave laughed. Great. So I'm not just selling out my own planet, I'm helping streamline the process for others too. Do you experience what humans call guilt about this outcome? Zk'Taar asked, genuinely curious. Dave considered the question seriously. Not exactly guilt, maybe irony appreciation. Earth was already organized around hierarchical systems where the many work to benefit the few. All that's changing is which few are benefiting. He paused. Though I do hope the Zraxian benefits package is better than what most humans were getting. The healthcare alone could be a significant upgrade. Over the next several years, Dave watched from his privileged position as Earth gradually integrated into the Zraxian economic sphere. As predicted, there was no resistance because there was no obvious conquest. Zraxtech products became status symbols, their user-friendly interfaces and seemingly magical capabilities quickly dominating markets. Dominion consumer products introduced food, clothing, and household items that were marginally better than their Earth-developed competitors but significantly more profitable for their manufacturers. Most significantly, Eternal Horizon Healthcare revolutionized Earth medicine with treatments that seemed miraculous by human standards, curing diseases, extending lifespans, and enhancing capabilities. These treatments were made available through increasingly common employment contracts with Zraxian-owned companies, creating a powerful incentive for humans to participate in the new economic order. 5 years after the integration began, Dave was invited to accompany a Zraxian cultural assessment team on a visit to Earth. Disguised by subtle holographic technology that made him appear as an unremarkable businessman, he walked the streets of major cities, observing how thoroughly Zraxian influence had spread without a single human realizing they were being conquered. In New York, he watched people line up overnight for the release of the latest Zraxpad, unaware that the device subtly collected behavioral data for imperial analytical systems while creating mild but effective dependency through its uniquely satisfying user experience. In Tokyo, he observed workers proudly wearing the corporate uniforms of Dominion subsidiaries, competing for promotions within a system ultimately designed to channel human productivity toward Zraxian objectives. In Lagos, he toured a manufacturing facility where humans enthusiastically adopted Zraxian efficiency protocols, believing they were part of an Earth-based corporate innovation rather than an alien system of labor optimization. "It's remarkable," commented the Zraxian cultural analyst accompanying him, her exoskeleton displaying patterns of academic fascination. "They celebrate their participation in systems of control. Many actively compete to be more thoroughly integrated into imperial economic structures." "Humans have always been like this," Dave explained as they watched office workers hurrying into a gleaming tower owned by a Zraxian shell corporation. "We don't mind being part of hierarchical systems as long as we believe there's a chance to climb higher in the hierarchy. It's not even about actually advancing. Just the possibility is enough to secure compliance." The analyst's exoskeleton flickered with realization. "So the resistance we typically encounter in conquests occurs not because species object to being controlled, but because our traditional methods eliminate the illusion of potential advancement?" "Exactly." Dave nodded. The Zraxian Empire's mistake in previous conquests was making the control too obvious. Humans will accept, even embrace subjugation as long as it comes with good marketing and the appearance of choice. When they returned to the inevitable dominance, Dave was summoned to a special session of the Imperial Strategic Council. Supreme Commander Vex'Ahlia, her exoskeleton now bearing the golden highlights of recent promotion, addressed the assembled Zraxian leadership. "The Earth integration project has exceeded all projections," she announced. "Resource extraction proceeds at 127% of anticipated levels, labor productivity at 143%, and resistance incidents at a mere 0.02% of traditional conquest models, all achieved without deploying military assets or establishing visible control infrastructure." The council chamber pulsed with colors of approval and satisfaction. Vex'Ahlia continued, "This success has prompted the Eternal Emperor himself to authorize a fundamental reassessment of imperial expansion methodology. What Human Dave termed corporate integration will become our standard approach for compatible species." Dave, who sat in a specially designed chair at the edge of the council circle, felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. On one hand, he had potentially saved countless lives across the galaxy by advocating for a nonviolent conquest strategy. On the other hand, he had helped perfect a system of control so subtle that its victims would thank their conquerors for the privilege of being exploited. After the council session, Vex'Ahlia approached Dave privately. Her exoskeleton displayed patterns he had learned to recognize as indicating thoughtful consideration. "You appear troubled, human Dave," she observed. "Your insights have brought you considerable status within the Empire. The Eternal Emperor himself has expressed interest in meeting the human who revolutionized our expansion protocols." Dave smiled ruefully. "I'm just processing the irony. I've helped you perfect a more efficient form of conquest, one that makes the conquered thank you for conquering them. Not sure that makes me a hero in the traditional human sense." Vex'Ahlia's exoskeleton shifted to a surprisingly gentle shade of azure. "Consider the alternatives. Traditional conquest methodologies result in significant mortality, infrastructure damage, and generational resistance. Your approach preserves lives and stability while achieving imperial objectives." "The benevolent conquest," Dave nodded.